The Gameweek 29 deadline is upon us. It's time to make some final decisions. Welcome to FPL, mate. My name is Dan, and even though this video is going to be based around the idea of a perfect Gameweek 29 team or a free hit team, this video is so jam-packed full of stats, information, and tips that I think it's going to be super useful for anyone who watches it. Let's get going. We need to make some final decisions. So guys, I have organized today's video into chapters. So if you are looking for something specific, maybe you're just looking for a midfielder or you want to just know the injury news for this week, then there are chapters there for you to check out. But as always, I would advise that you try and watch the whole video because there may be some things, I'm pretty sure there will be some things that you didn't know you needed to know. So we're going to help you out today, guys, and I'm going to start off with a quick roundup of all of the injury news. So here are the highlights for this week after the press conferences that we've seen. I think these are the most key FPL relevant headlines, I suppose. First of all, Trent Alexander-Arnold, he has not been assessed for injury, but he will be back before the end of the season, apparently. So that does not sound good at all. I've seen rumours that he could be out for 6 to 8 weeks, so quite a long time. So I would be looking at selling Trent Alexander-Arnold if this news is to be believed and if these quotes are to be interpreted. Because, yes, certainly it doesn't sound too positive for Trent. We've got Saka here, who is getting closer to a return, according to Mikel Arteta, and there are rumours that he is going to be available for Game Week 30. So just a little warning there if you are picking up players like Nwaneri or Trossard or Martinelli. It could be that some of these guys could become minutes risk as we get into Game Week 30 with Saka eating into some of those minutes. We already know Martinelli is back and available now as well. So some of those wingers for Arsenal may see their minutes start to dwindle just a little bit. Danso is unavailable. He's picked up a hamstring injury for Spurs, so yet another defensive injury for Spurs, just as they were looking like they were getting back on track. Vandenberg has trained and has a good chance of playing against Bournemouth, which is, I think, kind of interesting. A few people do have Vandenberg in their squad, and we're kind of worried that they may have to maybe take a hit to remove Vandenberg, but actually he could play this week after all. So even though we're not expecting a huge amount of points from him, I guess it's nice to have an extra body on the pitch. And finally, Manetzi. This is a kind of interesting one. He is a midfielder who has been doing quite well for Wolves recently. He actually scored in Game Week 28, and after being substituted at half-time in Game Week 28, there were some concerns about his injuries, but he is available to play against Southampton this week despite that injury scare. So if you do fancy a Wolves differential attacker, I suppose, then Manetzi is definitely a player you could consider going for. And before we move on to the bulk of the video, I do want to cover hits because I've had so many questions around hits for this week, and I basically laid out a couple of criteria of when it might be a good idea to take a hit and maybe when you should be a little more cautious. So first of all, taking a -4 hit could be a good idea if you do not have 11 playing players, particularly in the midfield and forward positions. I would be reasonably happy to swap non-playing midfielders and forwards to playing midfielders and forwards. So for example, if you've got Cunha in your team, but you don't have Chris Wood in your team, I would be willing to take a -4 hit to swap a Cunha for a Wood. There is a very good chance that that will pay off for you. That is a very positive move to make. We've got other criteria here. If you need to fund another move, for example, you may need to sell a player like Palmer, even though he has a fixture, and that might fund other moves like bringing in Haaland or Bruno Fernandes, for example. And finally, if you are worried about the minutes risk of one of your players, I'm looking at you, Dango Ouattara. He could be another player that you could consider taking a hit for, but that is a little more risky than the other criteria that we just mentioned. Now, you should probably be cautious about taking a -4 hit if you are swapping non-playing goalkeepers and defenders for playing ones. It's unlikely that this will pay off. So, for example, if you swap a Henderson, maybe you have Henderson, Dean Henderson is your goalkeeper, and you want to swap him for Pickford, for example, is it super likely that that -4 hit will pay off? Probably not. It's more than likely that Pickford is going to get 2 or 3 points. That is the usual thing we see with goalkeepers and defenders more often than the clean sheets. And therefore, you are going to be down on your points hit. You are going to be down points. So, yeah, it is unlikely that the goalkeepers and defenders are going to pay off as much as the forwards and midfielders, but you can still do it. It's just a little more risky. And if it's for 1 week only, again, I would be more cautious. A lot of people are planning on maybe wildcarding in game week 30. If that is the case, then you are going to have to be a little more cautious because your hits have to pay off within just one game week. If you are actually planning on wildcarding in game week 31 or maybe even later in the season and you need these players for the long term, then actually it is going to be far more beneficial to take a hit because you're bringing in players that you think will be great for the long term. So if it's for short-term players, that is not so good. If you are picking up players for slightly longer term, even if it's 2 game weeks rather than 1, far more worth it. So Everton players, for example, these players are only really good for 1 game week. Then they have tough fixtures from game week 30 onwards. These are players you'd be less likely to take a hit for. And finally, do not take a hit to directly swap playing players for other playing players. I've seen people, taking hits to remove, a Robinson for an Aina, for example. Just not going to be worth it, generally speaking. And also, even if you've got like a Wissa in your team, if you're taking a hit to move Wissa to Evan Nilsson or Wood maybe, I'm not super keen on that one. I think it is a little bit luxury to be swapping playing players for other playing players unless it is to fund another move. That is the only exception to that one. So, with that all said, guys, let's start building this dream team for Game Week 29. And we've got loads of information, loads of stats that are going to help you pick out the players that you want to buy ahead of Game Week 29. So let's put a pitch on screen and we're going to start filling this up with my dream Game Week 29 team. If I was free hitting, this would be the team I would go for. And I'm not free hitting, but I will still be looking to pick up a lot of these players for this week. I'll be looking to make 4 transfers and all 4 of them are players from this team. So if you're just making transfers, still plenty of good info for you right now. I've certainly found it useful researching for this video. So let's start off looking at the goalkeepers and defenders, these defensive assets, and how are we going to do that? Well, let's have a look at these teams to target for the clean sheet odds from Rob T. So these are the market data, the betting odds, if you like, and these guys get paid way more than me to figure out what are the most likely outcomes in football matches. And when we look through these clean sheet odds, we can see that Everton and Arsenal right at the top, 36% of each of these teams keeping clean sheets. Everton and Arsenal both been strong defenses, particularly Arsenal, who, even though there's not a favourable fixture there, Arsenal are a team that we do back to keep a clean sheet in any given game week. Every other week, they do seem to be keeping a clean sheet. So I think there's going to be decent chance even against Chelsea. And of course, Everton against West Ham there as well. Interestingly, we see Manchester United against Leicester with a 33% chance of a clean sheet. And really, that's because Leicester have been the weakest attack in the recent months. They really don't produce much expected goals, particularly non-penalty expected goals. They don't take as many shots as pretty much the entire rest of the league, and therefore Manchester United, who we don't necessarily see as a strong defence, have the most favourable fixture of this game week. Leicester are a weaker attack than Southampton, than Ipswich, than whatever other team you want to talk about. Leicester are the weakest attack, and that's why we see Manchester United so high up on this list. Other teams to target are probably looking like Nottingham Forest and maybe Wolves as well. But certainly Forest are up here very high, 31% chance of a clean sheet against Ipswich. Forest have done very well defensively in the last 2 fixtures, so they're also putting up a positive trend for clean sheets, which is good to see. Outside of that, we've got Wolves, Man City, Bournemouth, Fulham, and West Ham. There are okay chances of clean sheets here, but really nothing spectacular. So that does put me off the likes of Man City defenders. Brighton have been in good form recently, and I do expect them to score. Bournemouth here as well. I think Brentford are one of the top attacking teams in the Premier League. And Spurs for Fulham is interestingly because Spurs actually, for non-penalty expected goals, actually are not putting up the best numbers, and I'll throw that on screen next, guys. So as you can see, over the past 10 game weeks per fixture, Leicester right at the bottom for these these attacking numbers, non-penalty XG. But we also do see the likes of Spurs pretty low down on this list as well. So if you are a Robinson or a Castagna owner, I think there can be some positivity to be taken here. We can see Bournemouth and Brentford are really high up on this list, so neither team are probably going to keep a clean sheet. They're both very likely to score against each other. And you guys can pause the video, have a look through the rest of these numbers for non-penalty expected goals for each of these Premier League teams over the past 10 game weeks per game, of course. So we've got a lot of information there about the defenders that we want to pick out. Let's start throwing some names on the pitch here. So we're going to go for Pickford in goal. Obviously Everton with the best clean sheet odds for this week, so we've got to get a Everton defender in here. And you know, Everton defenders, typically none of them really have very much attacking threat at all, so it might be sensible to go for a goalkeeper here rather than a defender from Everton. Into the defenders, we've got Gabriel here. We know that Gabriel is probably the best attacking defender for Arsenal. We've got some bonus point potential there as well for him, which is super useful. And I think when picking defenders, what we probably want to do is look at those clean sheet odds, look at the best defenses, who is most likely to keep a clean sheet, and then on top of that, then we add on the attacking element there. There aren't too many super attacking defenders to pick from this week. There's no Trent, for example, no Lewis Hall, there's no Daniel Munoz. So the attacking defenders are less of a consideration this week, but we still need to make the best of what we do have. And that brings us to Nico Williams here. Now, we did speak about Nico Williams versus the remainder of the Forest defenders in yesterday's video, but just in case you missed it, let's go over this very quickly again. So out of the 4 Forest defenders, and that is Williams, Milenkovic, Aina, and Murillo, we can look at these players and see what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and therefore which one we should pick. So first of all, Nico Williams and Milenkovic are the 2 players that stand out for most likely to get attacking contributions. Both of them have decent shot numbers, decent XG numbers over the past 9 game weeks we've put here, just so we got an even number of fixtures between all of these players. But also, Nico Williams, a little bit of creativity there as well. So both of these players are taking shots. There is a small but still significant chance that you could get an attacking return. You'd have to get a bit lucky, but it's still very, very possible indeed. After that, we come to Aina, who is more expensive than the other guys, but actually, numbers aren't looking great. Just 1 shot in the past 10 game weeks, actually. He's really not taking shots on at the moment. He is making more key passes, however, than his teammates. Not by much. 4 key passes in 9-10 game weeks is not very good, but it is still something, and it does put him as the highest volume of key passes among these Forest defenders. But generally, these Forest defenders, they don't create very much. Some of them are more shooting based, but not really for kind of creativity. It's not really their role in the team. And finally, we have Murillo, who, although he has taken shots, they've been from very low XG chances. He's trying to score those wonder goals, but they don't really come off. And also, he does have a bit of creativity here. Technically, the highest expected assists, but it came from just 1 big chance created. So that doesn't look very sustainable to me. So after that, bonus points. Murillo is clear for bonus points. If all of these defenders each keep a clean sheet and none of them getting any kind of attacking return, Murillo is the most likely player to get bonus points. He is miles ahead of Milenkovic, for example, who is the weakest of these 4. The second best for bonus points potential is Nico Williams. You can see here on screen through the stats and the BPS number, followed by Aina, and finally Milenkovic. If Milenkovic does not get an attacking return, he is not getting bonus points. And even if he does get an attacking return, he's still not guaranteed bonus points because the kind of actions he makes on the field just do not favour bonus points compared to the likes of Murillo and Nico Williams, who it far more heavily favours. So all in all, it looks like on balance, Nico Williams with decent attacking threat and decent bonus point potential is the strongest contender for a Forest defender to go for this week, and that's why we've got him in the team. And let's bring ourselves to the final defender in the 3-man defense for our Game Week 29 team. And I think this position is probably the most, I don't want to say contentious, but maybe more variable. You can kind of go with the kind of player that you want to go for here, based on some of the other defenses we spoke about. You could go for a Manchester United defender, you could go for a Wolves defender, a Man City defender, maybe a Bournemouth defender here as well if you wanted to. All of completely valid picks, and there's not too much splitting these teams in terms of clean sheet potential. So I've put on the field Ait-Nouri for this team, but I would be just as happy with Kerkez. I would just be happy with Mazraoui, and maybe even happy with Gvardiol as well. So it's just about looking through these teams, picking out the most attacking of the defenders. Kerkez is the most attacking for Bournemouth. Ait-Nouri is the most attacking for Wolves. Mazraoui, with Dorgu unavailable, suspended, is going to be the most attacking, most likely, for Manchester United. And then, of course, Gvardiol for Man City. So take your pick out of those guys. I think they all work. But I think the base of your defense will be Pickford, Gabriel, Williams, and then that fourth slot is kind of up to you. We've gone for Ait-Nouri here, but that is not essential. There are options here. And it's kind of a similar situation in midfield. So let's move on to the midfield conversation next. And what I want to have a look at here, actually, is the teams with the highest projected goals. Which teams are likely to score goals this game week? Man City, 2.2 projected goals. Bournemouth, 2.15. Fulham up here on 1.9. Manchester United, 1.8. Arsenal, 1.75. Followed by Forest and Wolves. And really all of the rest of the teams pretty low down here, actually, for their projected goals for this game week. So you never know. Of course, these teams can score goals, but certainly, we'd like to fill out the majority of our attack with these players from teams towards the top of this list, I would say. So let's go on here, guys, because I want to have a look at the main three midfielders that are just super obvious. We can throw them on the pitch. Bruno Fernandes in fantastic form, particularly if you look in all competitions, set pieces, penalties, and really carrying this Manchester United team in a heavily favourable fixture against Leicester. After that, we've got two penalty-taking midfielders playing against each other. Bryan Mbeumo playing against Bournemouth away, and Justin Kluivert playing against Brentford at home. Both of these players look pretty good, look pretty solid, look pretty sensible players to have in your team. But the fourth and maybe fifth, if you want to play 5 men in midfield, I'm going for 4 men in midfield for my team, but you could potentially play 5 men. The fourth and fifth slot are far more contentious, and there are so many options here. So let's try and go through some of those options, although it's going to be impossible to cover everyone here. So what we've got in front of us today, guys, is a list of midfielders ordered by expected goal involvements over the past 6 game weeks per start. And as we see, Cole Palmer at the top. Right at the very top of this list. He's putting up the best underlying numbers. Of course, we know he has a difficult fixture, which may impact that. After that, we've got Mbeumo and Kluivert in second and third place. And this, by the way, guys, is just players who actually do have a fixture in game week 29. So Mbeumo and Kluivert, they are sitting up there as well. We know these are players we want, for sure. After that, Tavernier only just reintroduced into the Bournemouth team, so I don't know how reliable this is going to be in terms of data, because he's only played 2 games, but 0.5 expected goal involvements per start. That is actually reasonably encouraging here. If you want to take a risk on a player like Tavernier's minutes, then he is definitely going to be an option for you. After that, maybe a surprising one here is actually Ødegaard, who has actually been playing pretty well, obviously, in the Champions League. He scored twice and assisted against PSV. Against Manchester United, he was the standout player in game week 28 in terms of who is taking the most shots, who is, creating the most in that game. We do, of course, know that Ødegaard is on penalties and set pieces as well, some set pieces as well, which again is going to be very useful trying to find FPL points. The fixture is against Chelsea, so I don't know if that is the most amazing fixture, but it's okay. It's decent enough. We just need to see if Arsenal can start scoring some goals again, like they did in the Champions League, of course. After that, we've got the likes of Decore, a little bit random. Do you want to go for him? Maybe, but the numbers are there, I suppose, underlying numbers. Alanga is putting up some really good numbers generally, but as we mentioned in yesterday's video, they are a little bit misleading as they have come from kind of low volume of shots. Particularly one shot he's taken in the past 6 game weeks pretty much encompasses all of his XG from this period of games. And he is looking a little bit weaker at the moment, but decent amount of creativity for Alanga in this kind of new setup. Minter, great numbers. very cheap, but poor fixture. We've got Savinho in here. Is probably the standout Man City player outside of Haaland and Gavardio. Manetzi, we kind of mentioned already. Bowen, Semenyo, Bellegarde, Trossard, Bruno Fernandes. Actually, quite low on this list, which did surprise me a little bit. We've got Mitoma, Gibbs White, Nwaneri, and then we've got the likes of Son and Foden, expensive players who actually aren't doing too well at the moment, and Iwobi and Hudson-Odoi right at the bottom. But what I want to do before we move on and start picking these final midfielders, and of course, guys, as always, feel free to pause the video and have a full look through all of these stats, who is standing out to you, who isn't. But what I want to do is, instead of looking at expected goal involvement, I want to order this by actual FPL points per start, and the whole list flips. We see Hudson-Odoi right at the top rather than being right at the bottom. We've got Gibbs White up here as well all of a sudden. Kluivert is still up the top, so he's going to be really important. Bowen, Bruno, Son. These are players who are suddenly all the way up the list, where previously they were down pretty low previously. So what we want to probably learn from this is that these players in this order, this is the form order. So previously we had Palmer at the top, now he's second bottom, because whilst Palmer is putting up good numbers, he's in poor form. So maybe there's a balancing act to be done here, maybe picking some players in good form, some players with good numbers, or saying, okay, I need a player with both form and numbers, like Kluivert maybe, or maybe you want to go for a combination of the two, a player with okay form, a player with okay numbers. So you at least have that confidence that a player could be pretty decent there. But I think this probably does rule out certain players. I think it does rule out players like Iwobi, Nwaneri, Foden, maybe Trossard as well there, who doesn't have particularly good numbers or good form. So let's move on from there, and I'll tell you who my fourth midfield pick is for this team. But it is maybe controversial. It is going to be controversial because this fourth slot really could be pretty much any player on this list that you see in front of. All of these are decent enough options. It's going to be so difficult to predict which of these will bang, which of these won't. Outside of the obvious Bruno, Mbeumo, and Kluivert, it is far more difficult to make a prediction. I'm sure everyone will have their own different ideas. But the player I'm going for is going to be Martin Ødegaard. And a big reason for that is the penalties. I want to pick up another penalty-taking player for this team. And ordinarily, I would be looking at Ødegaard and I'd be thinking, his price tag is far too expensive for what he offers. And it is. It is too expensive. But if you are on a free hit, if you are looking for one game week only, he's going to be gone from your team next week. You don't have to worry about the investment. So if you do have a little bit of money to spend, then Ødegaard, I think, could be okay. It's useful to have penalty takers, of course, in your team. As I mentioned, Ødegaard putting up pretty good numbers in recent weeks. And actually, I think the form of his is improving. So it's a little bit speculative. There's no way I would be picking him if this was not for one game week only, because the price tag is just not worth it. But this is a unique scenario, and I think going for someone a little bit different, we don't want to be too boring, we don't want to be too template, we want to try and find some avenues of making gains. It is speculative, but all of the fourth midfield slots are speculative. I think Ødegaard could be one to go for, but as I say, this fourth spot is another optional one. Go for whoever you want in this fourth slot. I've picked Ødegaard. That doesn't mean it's the right answer. It doesn't mean it's the only answer. There are so many options here that are all seemingly equally good. This is just my choice. So now we've got a midfielder in there, I think we can move on to some forwards. And let's start off by having a look at the stats for forwards over recent game weeks. So again, we've got in front of you guys a list of forwards who are available to play in Game Week 29. And we've ordered them by non-penalty expected goals over the past 6 game weeks. Evan Nilsson comes out on top, but he has only played one game during this period, so could be a little misleading. Wissa and Beto also putting up really good non-penalty XG numbers. Erling Haaland actually in 4th place, but as a penalty taker, and a definite penalty taker, I think Beto could potentially be a penalty taker as well. But Haaland as a penalty taker for sure. We have to factor that in. That looks pretty good. After that, Raul Jimenez, Chris Wood, not so strong numbers at around just over 0.3 non-penalty XG per game. But again, these players are on penalties and both have pretty good fixtures this week. And the rest of these players is pretty much a wasteland. Xerxes, Vardy, Joao Pedro, Marmoush, Solanke, Højlund, and Strand Larsen really not putting up great numbers, to be honest, if we look at non-penalty. You could, of course, maybe get another jammy penalty from Joao Pedro, but it's probably less likely against a team like Man City, with Brighton not expected to have too much of the ball in that fixture. So I would say if we're looking at forwards this week, Evanilson, Wissa, Beto, Haaland, Raul, and Wood, so those 6 players are the 6 standout guys for this week. I think they're all great. I don't really want to knock any of them, but these are our standout guys. So let's pick 3 of them for our team. And how are we going to do that? We need more data. So here we go. Rob Tees, again, has provided the betting data for goal scorers for Game Week 29. And Haaland is here at 0.79 projected goals against Brighton this week. So he is by far the standout, most likely player to score, according to those who know best. After that, this is where things get interesting, because I'm sure most people expected Chris Wood to be in second place here, but he's not. Raul Jimenez is in second place here. Spurs are obviously a pretty weak defence. This is a home fixture for Raul Jimenez as well. And penalty takers as well. Haaland, Raul, Wood, all 3 of these guys are penalty takers, and that really does help out the numbers here quite significantly. So these are your top 3 forwards in terms of those projected goals. Strand Larsen is in here as well against Southampton. Kluivert, we already spoke about in the midfielders. We've got Evanilson and Beto in here as well. So it's kind of the same kind of forwards we were already speaking about. To be totally honest, it's only Wissa who is not on this page. I think Wissa is just below Fernandes, actually. So that is a minor difference there. So does that discount Wissa? Maybe. I don't think it does, particularly because I think the matchup for Wissa is good, because Bournemouth do concede a lot of goals from very central in the box areas. So I actually think Wissa is maybe underrated here by the bookies when we look at the matchup. But yeah, certainly Haaland, Raul, Wood, Evanilson, Beto, and I'd throw in Wissa in there as well. Look great. But we're starting to see some players stand out a little more than others. So let's start throwing some players on the field. So first of all, the super obvious Haaland, yeah, no doubt about it. He's going to be in any kind of perfect Game Week 29 team. Chris Wood is also going to be in that team. He is, a very safe player to go for. I think Wood, if you don't have him in your team, he is going to be the biggest threat to your rank. So if you are going without Wood, do so at your own risk. 90% of people are going to have Wood in terms of effective ownership. It's going to be 90% because a lot of people will be captaining him. May even be more than that. He's going to be incredibly popular this week. So we've got Haaland, we've got Wood. Who is the third guy? Well, for me, it is going to be Raul Jimenez, who I think is probably the most overlooked player ahead of Game Week 29. We've seen his data is actually not too bad. We know he's a penalty taker. We know this Spurs fixture is very good. And the bookies think he is more likely to score in Game Week 29 than Chris Wood is, which really is saying something. So let's have a look through some recent games for Raul Jimenez. And he hasn't started every single game because Muniz did play in Game Week 27 instead. But even in that game, we have seen that typically Raul Jimenez, even without penalties, he's getting over or around 0.5 expected goals per game, which is really nice, actually. And particularly in the more favourable fixtures, such as Spurs at home, I think he's got a reasonably good chance here of getting a goal in this game. So for that reason, I'm more than happy to put Raul Jimenez in as a one-week punt. If you need a player for Game Week 29 and 30, you're probably not going to go for Raul because he plays Arsenal in Game Week 30. But for a free hit team or for a one-week punt, Raul Jimenez, I think, is, like I say, the most overlooked player in the game of FPL right now. So guys, finally, let's check out the bench. We are going to put Raya on the bench here. I know it's a little bit expensive, a little bit extravagant, but we like the Arsenal defence, don't we? So we may as well have him as the backup there. We've got Gibbs White here, is another player I really do like for midfield. If you want to try Gibbs White instead of Ødegaard, I think that works. I think that's totally cool. Like I say, everyone's going to have the different opinion. If you wanted me to just give the boring answer, I would have probably said Elanga, but genuinely, I do prefer Ødegaard, Gibbs-White. There's a few other players I do prefer, even Semenyo, for example, but it's going to be so difficult to get everyone to agree on one thing other than a player like Elanga, because everyone seems to like him. Not for me. Kerkez and Mazraoui are two other defenders that we mentioned earlier that could take up that third slot. So if you prefer a Kerkez or a Mazraoui rather than an Ait-Nouri, I think that works perfectly fine. I probably prefer Mazraoui just a little bit more, just because we do have Mbeumo facing against Bournemouth, and it might be nice to kind of not hedge your bets and trying to go all in on either the attack or on the attacking players in that fixture, rather than, you know, hedging with one defender from one team and an attacker for the other team. If you've got the option, yeah, why not broaden it out a little bit there? So, yeah, this is what the team looks like. We're going to throw the captain's armband on Erling Haaland. Of course we are. He's got those best odds of getting an attacking return this week, or certainly a goal. Bruno Fernandes, with his form, I think is well worthy of the vice-captain as well. But obviously, Chris Wood is going to be in that conversation as well. The top three captains are, of course, Haaland, Fernandes, and Wood, and I would probably prefer them in that exact order. So if you're wondering who to captain, that is probably what I would suggest, but that is of course just my opinion, as is pretty much this entire team. But we did try and use some stats to back things up, some odds to back things up, to try and create an objective view of what might be good. And I think the bulk of this team really is looking very strong. Pickford, Gabriel, Nico Williams, Bruno, Mbeumo, Kluivert, Haaland and Wood, all pretty clear to me as players to include in the free hit team. It's really Ait-Nouri, Ødegaard and maybe Raul Jimenez. That is where you can get a little experimental, try and go for something a bit different, see if you can get an edge somewhere. That is where I will be looking to do that personally. But anyway, guys, that is going to be the team. If you've got any other questions related to Game Week 29, I will be more than happy to answer them. I'm usually pretty good with replying to comments. I reply to like 90% of comments. If you guys have questions, I do try my best. So do feel free to leave one down below and I'll try and help you guys out. But that's it for this week's videos. If you want to check out any more, you can look at the link here and check out another video from this week. And we will be back tomorrow for a deadline stream. Like, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you later, mates. Bye-bye.